Did Christianity spread because it was the absolute truth, which no one could disbelieve, or were there other historical factors involved? And is the religion of Christianity on its way to the historical archives? Stay tuned and we'll explore. One of the biggest contentions with Christian fundamentalists, as well as Christians in general, is their belief system based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the cross has to be correct because it spread to such a worldwide level. Well, then I had one of my atheist subscribers made an interesting comment and stated, well, if it wasn't for a certain emperor, it possibly wouldn't have spread as much. And of course, he's talking about the Emperor Constantine. Now, I don't know if Constantine was solely responsible for the spread of Christianity to such a worldwide level, but he certainly gave a kick to the football down the field. True, Christianity still exists today, but maybe it wouldn't have existed on the volume that it does, due to this chain reaction started by Constantine. Now, in fairness, the Christians were pretty much holding their own before Constantine. The Roman Empire population 200 AD, from what I read, was 59 to 76 million people, and 10% were Christians. And they were being heavily persecuted, many times being martyred for their faith. Yet they were still there under this oppression, 10% of the population. Now, I'm not sure why, for it seemed like the Roman polytheistic religion had an afterlife that greatly mirrored the Greeks. They had a concept that if you lived a righteous life, you would be deposited into the Elysium fields for eternal rest and enjoyment. They also had a concept of being punished for your misdeeds, although I believe that was a temporary process to be taken up later by the gods. They believed that some spirits served as protectors of the surviving members of the family. So I'm not sure that the concept of heaven for living a good life was much more of a selling point than their own afterlife at the time. However, the Christians were threatening you with damnation if you didn't believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ and all his divinity. So that is a little bit of a motivator to get someone to convert. And Christianity did offer the concept of everybody being equal under the eyes of God in a very oppressed society at the time. For in this time, all societies were oppressed. And the early Christians did dig their heels in under this persecution. But then all that was about to change, in which the Christian faith was going to go from the persecuted to the persecutors. Constantine made it illegal to persecute Christians during his reign in approximately 325 AD. And of course, he had great involvement with his advisor Eusebius and did a great deal to propagate Christianity during his reign. But it's under the year 380 under the Emperor Theodosius where Christianity was made the state religion of Rome. And not only that, with this proclaimed edict, it was the Nicene Christianity that was going to be the state religion, and those who practice other forms of Christianity were going to be labeled as heretics. The first one being executed, Priscillian, 5 years after this edict was mandated. And it wasn't long after that the Catholic Church was thoroughly entrenched in Roman politics and government. And the Roman Empire, at the height of its power, spread from the Middle East all the way to the British Isles, in which many various popes sent expeditions of missionaries, backed by the power of the Roman government to convert or else. And of course, even without this empire, the multiple god and demigod systems would have gone into the archives of history anyway, because mankind was expanding his intellectual realm in the sciences. First, we were making calculations of the sun moving around the earth, then realized that it wasn't the sun that moved at all, it was actually the earth. But no one thought any longer that a god was tugging it along across the sky. We would eventually figure out that a thunderstorm was due to meteorological conditions, not because some random god was angry at us. So I will contend that the multiple god system would have eventually become history no matter what. But the propagation of the Christian faith was very similar to the propagation of the faith of Islam. It was forced. If I was making this YouTube channel in the 13th century, they probably would have burned me at the stake. You were not allowed to have differing opinions from the church. This is evident from the Spanish Inquisition to the Salem witch trials. Heretics were labeled by any definition that the church deemed appropriate. Not only did people not have the resources to investigate whether the resurrection of Jesus and all his miracles was actually legitimate, even if they had these resources, they wouldn't be allowed to look into the matter. They were allowed to look at the Bible, and that was about it. And they had better bloody well agree with it at that time. And this religion of Christianity was passed down from generation to generation. Sure, off branches of Christianity grew, and blood was spilled because of these offshoots. But it basically came down to that all through Europe, the practice of Christianity was mandatory in families. Or if you weren't going to practice it, you better keep quiet about it. And of course, most people aren't going to stand up for things anyway, and I would keep quiet about it if they were going to burn me at the stake. So the doctrine of Christianity, with all the miracles and the resurrection of Christ, continued to be the truth. And it's a very interesting question to see how many people would have stayed Christian, or how much it would have passed generationally, if it wasn't a mandate under the tyranny of the Roman Empire. And that's my talking point to the apologists. Your religion didn't massively spread because it was the truth. It was required to be spread because of the government. But even after the ashes from the burned heretics cooled, we were still under the suppression of the church. It was only in 1968, during the case of Epperson versus Arkansas, where the court ruled that the allowing of the teaching of creationism while disallowing the teaching of evolution advanced a religion, therefore violated the U.S. Constitution. And it took until 1987 with the case Edwards versus Aguillard in the United States Supreme Court again, that finally struck down the constitutionality of teaching creationism, period, because it was advancing a religion. It wasn't too long ago that unmarried couples weren't allowed to live together in many states, and it really didn't become, quote, acceptable until the early 1990s. That's why the old sitcom before that, Three's Company, was such taboo. All of that came from the influence of religion, no different than Islam. And of course, if you're brought up with all these tenets of religion, i.e. Christianity, what are you going to do? You're going to pass that to your offspring. So only until recently we have had huge societal pressure to practice Christian beliefs, whether you like them or not. And prior to that, it was mandated by the government. And the question is, now that this tyranny has been lifted from us, will Christianity continue? Of course, if they actually ever found the remains of Christ in a tomb, and that's actually been propagated, which I'll do a whole separate video on, with the Talpiot tomb, that would be the end of Christianity. Because if that was confirmed, you would no longer have an argument, period. But I suspect many of the fundamentalists would just say that Satan was tricking you, as they do with every piece of historical or archaeological or scientific evidence in front of them. But now, just our ability to research for ourselves, and having the freedom to do so, I predict will cause Christianity to shrink greatly. Because as I said, way back when, people only had the Bible and the church leaders telling them that they must nod in agreement with the teachings of Christ. Now we can actually look up for ourselves and find out we have no idea who wrote the Gospels, and that the earliest text we have of the Gospel of Mark is 150 to 250 AD. At minimum 120 years after Yeshua's death. We can actually look up and compare the Hebrew actual text side by side with the New American Bible, and you can see for yourself how the text was manipulated over time. That's certainly the reason I became a deconvert. I went out there trying to prove myself wrong, and all the atheists who sponsor these YouTube channels all say the same thing. Most were former Christians, many of them fundamentalist Christians. But the more you research the apologist claims, the more you find out that it's nothing but mere speculation, bad speculation at that, or flat out untruths. A Gallup poll showed that church membership is under 50% for the first time. There was a Christian website that predicted that Christianity would be in the minority within 50 years in the United States. Christianity may very well follow the path of its pagan ancestors, because mankind began his expansion of the intellectual realm the day mankind was able to stand up on two legs. And throughout the entire history of man, various religions have followed him for long periods of time, until man's intellect finally outgrows the religion itself. We have been told for over 2,000 years that the tenets of Christianity, specifically Christ's divinity and his resurrection, are absolute fact. It is only in the last 50 to 100 years that people have begun to challenge the Christian churches. And as I said, it's only in the last couple decades where you can research from yourself right from the internet versus a very limited resources in the library or bookstore down the street. So, Christian fundamentalist apologist, I think your argument of so many people believe it so it must be true only worked in a society where at best you were pressured to believe in it, and at worst burned at the stake if you didn't. It'll be interesting to see with the allowance of intellectual freedom, whether in 500 years Christianity is still being practiced, or sits in the archives right next to their pagan predecessors. Now, if you'd like some more topics of debate with Christian fundamentalists, hit the playlist card at the end of the video. And check out my own tale, which at least I admit is fiction, The Second Fall, an offbeat Armageddon sure to offend the fundamentalist, and probably a few others. Link is in the video description as well as a channel banner, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.